it does look intentional. It's like Joe Biden wants to punish the people who didn't vote for him, and opening up the floodgates to the border is one way to do it.
That's JD Vance arguing that Biden is intentionally opening the border. He has an open border policy in order to make the lives of people living in his state of Ohio even more miserable. This is intentional. His rant gets even worse. And he even suggests that Biden is interested in essentially executing this master game plan that physically hurts voters in middle America. Let's watch.
That if you wanted to kill a bunch of MAGA voters in the middle of the heartland, how better than to target them and their kids with this deadly fentanyl? And I mean, the crazy thing, of course, is it's not just drug addicts who are affected by this, right? I mean, of course, most of our voters are not people who are suffering from some addiction, but they know a lot of people who are, right? Their kids are affected by it. A lot of grandparents, man, who are taking care of grandkids that they weren't expecting to take care of because this fentanyl killed their children, right? And those grandparents had to step up. So it's really a border crisis that has gone all over the country. It's not just the southern border states that are affected by it, it's everybody. And man, it does look intentional.
So there is a tiny, tiny kernel of truth in what he's saying, and I want to address that. What is not at all true is that the Biden administration intentionally has an open border policy to allow for the flow of illegal drugs into the country to kill off right-wing voters. That is, I mean, just the biggest smear, biggest hyperbole, and also it just shows how little the right wing really knows about Democratic strategy and how, I mean, look, when you look at how weak Democrats are, the idea that they would do something so heinous is so insane. But putting that aside, he is right in pointing out what is happening in middle America, what's happening across the country in regard to drug overdoses. In fact, in 2020 alone, 2,000 homeless people in Los Angeles County alone died on the streets as a result of drug overdoses. We're talking about fentanyl, we're talking about meth. Yes, these drugs have been smuggled into the United States through our southern border. However, it's also important to focus on the difference between how the Trump administration handled that versus how the Biden administration handled that. And this is where the Biden administration drives me crazy, because it wasn't until I started researching this story today that I realized that Border Patrol under the leadership of President Joe Biden has been far more effective in seizing drugs as these smugglers are trying to smuggle it across the border. I want to give you those details in a moment, but Cenk, I also wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in regard to what JD Vance said there.
Yeah, so the Republicans have realized there's no bottom of the barrel. You could just say the most hideous things. There'll be no pushback. There'll be no check on them, and all their voters will believe it instantly. He said that Biden is trying to intentionally kill MAGA voters. That's insane, insane. By the way, I mean, we're talking about fentanyl, et cetera, but JD Vance got famous off of Hillbilly Elegy. That's a book that he wrote, got turned into a movie, and that's about the opioid crisis. That has nothing to do with Mexico or drugs coming across the border. That's American drug companies. And JD Vance knows that. He's studied it, he's researched it. He's an Ivy League graduate. He knows that talking about immigration in that context or border crossings in that context, which he's done many times before, is just a flat out lie. And it's actually drug companies that are funding the Republican Party that caused the mess in the first place. But it's kind of inconvenient to say, oh, my donors and the donors of all my colleagues are the ones who actually killed you for profit. And all of my friends in the Republican Party, and a lot of them in the Democratic Party, allowed that to happen because they were getting donations from drug companies. Well, that doesn't sell as well. Scary brown man, and Biden let him kill you. That sells really well in Republican circles because it's not close to true. It scares the bejesus out of right wingers. And what's the number one defining trait of right wingers? Fear. They're deathly afraid of everything. They don't think, they're not logical. They just go, oh, I'm scared. And then they just go vote for Republicans that scare them the most. And Democrats have no effective pushback. And there is one, Anna, there is one group of people in politics, though, that did almost intentionally kill MAGA voters. That would be right-wing media, pundits, and politicians who told him COVID's no big deal and you shouldn't get vaccinated.
Take ivermectin.
Yeah.
Take ivermectin, even though there's absolutely no evidence indicating that it serves as a prophylactic or a treatment, an effective treatment for COVID. Don't get vaccinated, don't wear masks, don't social distance, open up businesses prematurely. And I'm talking about the very beginning of the pandemic in the early stages in 2020. I mean, you even had the lieutenant governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, flat out say on cable television, yeah, some elderly people might die, but saving the economy is more important. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but he was very clear about what his intentions were there. But again, in order to ensure that the truth gets out there, you would need the party that serves as opponents to people like JD Vance to come out and aggressively spread that message. And we have not seen that. In fact, to that point, we have not seen any type of aggressive or effective campaigning from Democrats, particularly the Biden administration, which again, to repeat myself, has actually done a much better job in catching these smugglers before they're able to smuggle a lot of these drugs into the country, okay? And I don't think we should in any way minimize the reality. There is high demand in this country for things like Mexican fentanyl and Mexican meth. We need to address why that is. And no one is addressing that. There's also an interesting way that the right wing talks about addiction, handles addiction when it impacts their communities. Because when it impacts their communities, they see those who are addicted to drugs as victims. When it impacts communities of color, they see those communities as the bad guys. Oh, these are losers, these are bums, these are people who can't take control of their lives, can't pick themselves up by the bootstraps. I just want to make it clear that there is a difference in the way that they handle these conversations, depending on which communities they're referring to. Now, putting that aside, let's talk about what the reality is at the border and then compare it to Trump versus Biden. So, Laredo, for instance, Laredo, Texas, is the front line in the United States government's long and often demoralizing effort to stop illegal drugs at the border. US Interstate 35 runs from here all the way to Duluth, Minnesota, right up the middle of the United States. For long haul trucking, it is the highway equivalent of the Mississippi River, a central artery into the American heartland. So when you talk about these drugs being smuggled past the southern border, straight to middle America, there is some truth to that. Now, more than 100,000 Americans are dying each year from drug overdoses, and most of those fatalities are in fact linked to fentanyl. Overdoses from fentanyl have become the leading cause of death for Americans ages 18 to 45, according to the latest data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now let's talk a little bit about what the Biden administration has managed to do versus what we saw during the Trump administration. CBP's Laredo field office seized 588 pounds of the powerful synthetic opioid fentanyl during the 2021 fiscal year, an 11-fold increase over the 50 pounds, just 50 pounds detected in 2020. Cocaine seizures at the Laredo port of entry doubled last year. And CBP seized more than 190,000 pounds of meth in total at US borders, nearly 3 times the amount confiscated in 2018, when of course, Donald Trump was the president. The amount of cocaine and fentanyl seized at the border at 8 Texas ports of entry increased significantly last year during the Biden administration, keeping massive amounts of the drugs out of the country, according to US Customs and Border Patrol, Border Protection. And we all know that that government agency is not some sweet little left-wing organization or agency. So the fact that they are putting that data out there means quite a bit. And then let's take a look at this graph because it shows you, it helps you visualize the difference. National drug involved overdose deaths really did shoot up in 2020 under Donald Trump's watch. And look, I think that the COVID pandemic also had a lot to do with it. But for the right wing, for JD Vance to pretend as though A, Biden has an open border policy, and B, he's intentionally allowing for the flow of these harmful drugs into the country to intentionally kill right-wing voters is one of the most disgusting and dishonest smears I've heard from a right winger, and that's saying something.
Okay, now if Democrats were effective, they would do a giant press conference here talking about how much more Biden has caught in fentanyl crossing the border than Trump has. And they would say, why did that loser Donald Trump not catch any of the drugs coming in to the country that's killing your kids? I can't believe Donald Trump let all of these drugs into the country. If there's drugs in there now, it must be the ones Donald Trump let through the border because he didn't do anything to stop the fentanyl. These are facts, these are provable facts, okay? Instead, here's what the Democrats will say.
Totally, totally.
Of course, right? And everybody will hear JD Vance, and especially because he said it in an outrageous way, and it'll get stuck in people's heads. And then once you ask them afterwards, who let the fentanyl into the country, 90% of them will answer Democrats. Because the Republicans know how to get their message out, including through controversial statements. And the Democrats have no idea how to counter them, and are the most incompetent party that I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. I really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.